Good evening, pretty shiny peoples. One moment. Okay, got my water, all that good stuff. So, I did miss last week, and I did not tell you guys about it. I did say the first week of August. So, I'm sorry about that. B, it's still the first week of August. And C, last week was very unexpected. My appointment did not quite go as expected, and so I had another bone graft. Luckily, though, this bone graft doesn't seem to be making, like, I'm not starting over at square one. I still have this list that I'm trying to conquer, but I'm not starting over at square one with it, right? And that's a good thing. 1 second, I gotta see who's calling. Okay, so sorry about that. Luckily, though, we had not started reading, so we'll get there. Anyway, so yes, again, my apologies about missing last Saturday. So sorry. Did not expect to have to deal with a second bone graft. But I did, and so now I have to go back in another 5 months and blah blah blah. But whatever. Other updates. Copper, since he's no longer emaciated, has like doubled in size, and so I no longer think he's going to be a super small dog. Still waiting on his DNA results, but we will eventually know what he is. So, as the title says, tonight is Night Shift Part 2. In Part 1, we only read one story. If I read 2 stories tonight, since I missed last week, these 2 stories are actually about the same length as that one story. Plus, we do need to get through this book. We need to get through this book because the series was voted on for book club nights. And I'm really excited about that. So it's going to be a long journey, guys. It's a 7-book series. 8 if I read the one written after the original 7. But we are going to get through it, and I love the series. Tonight, though, we are continuing in the night shift. We will definitely read the graveyard shift, and we may or may not read Night Surf, which is the one right after it. Yes, spooky. I had a bone graft. Oh God, when was it? I had extensive bone grafts. I had a pretty big surgery in February, and a lot of my bone deterioration was in my jaw, and so I had bone grafts done there, and that's why I suddenly popped up with this newfound lisp that I've been battling. And they keep telling me that I will slowly conquer it. But Everybody else says they don't hear it anymore, but I still hear it and it drives me nuts. Anyway, so I had to go back 5 months later to check on everything. And I thought that it was just going to be like, okay, great, we're going to send you home. And if you have any issues in the next month, call us. But it didn't go that way. And I had to get another bone graft. And so now I have to go back in December and we'll see where things are then. Plus side is, although I still hear the lisp, it's still there and I'm still battling it. It did not send me back to square one. I do not sound like a barely like I barely make sense, right? Like I barely made sense for a while. I sounded like I was drunk all the time. It was terrible. And I think, according to some comments made online, I think there were a few people online who thought that I was constantly drunk. I was not. I am, however, still trying to conquer the lisp, but that is neither here nor there. Oh, thanks. No, I'm fine. I'm fine either way, I didn't want to have more problems later. And I happen to have I had Super Munchkins fixing to go to college, but way back when I had a particularly hard pregnancy. And so, this is something I've seen coming for a long time because I had a really, really hard pregnancy. I almost didn't make it. She almost didn't make it. It was a whole fucking mess. And it was absolutely brutal. And one of the many, many problems that I had was that all of my food issues were extremely exaggerated. And so I could not hold down food and I could not gain weight. And babies doing what they do, zygotes, I should say, zygotes and embryos doing what they do, got their nutrition from anywhere. And so it cost me my hair and my bone density. Luckily, hair grows back pretty easily, right? It's about down to my waist again, so that's not a big deal. But because I lost so much bone density, I've had, like, especially in my jaw, since I was like 20, 21, I've had like some slow like bone deterioration. So it's not like it's something that like I didn't see coming or that like my health is in jeopardy or anything like that. It's not. It's just, maintaining function. However, it comes with side effects like a lisp and temporarily, hopefully temporarily at least, a slightly uneven face. But that is okay. Anyway, so where I lost my bookmark. What page were we on? There it is. Copper. Copper breaks full quarantine tomorrow. So there's that too. He's doing great. Anyway, I had to get a drink of water before I started. And for all my 420 friends, I will start reading right after I take a hit, okay? Because it's going to be a while before I can pause and take another one. You guys get to do it whenever, but I cannot, so. All right. All right, so night shift, and this is story number 2, graveyard shift. And I'm sorry if my dogs bark. I'm really sorry. Anyway. 2 a.m. Friday. Hall was sitting on the bench by the elevator, the only place on the 3rd floor where a working Joe could catch a smoke, when Warwick came up. He wasn't happy to see Warwick. The foreman wasn't supposed to show up at 3 during the graveyard shift. He was supposed to stay down in his office in the basement drinking coffee from the urn that stood on the corner of his desk. Besides, it was hot. It was the hottest June on record in Gates Falls, and the orange crush thermometer, which was always by the elevator, had once rested at 94 degrees at 3 in the morning. God only knew what kind of hellhole the mill was on the 3 to 11 shift. Hall worked the picker machine, a bulky gadget manufactured by a defunct Cleveland firm in 1934. He had only been working in the mill since April, which meant he was still making minimum, $1.78 an hour, which was still all right. No wife, no steady girl, no alimony. He was a drifter, and during the last 3 years he had moved on his thumb from Berkeley, college student, to Lake Tahoe, busboy, to Galveston, stevedore, to Miami, short order cook, to Wheeling, taxi driver and dishwasher, to Gates Falls, Maine, picker machine operator. He didn't figure on moving again until the snow fell. He was a solitary person, and he liked the hours from 11 to 7 when the blood flow of the big mill was at its coolest, not to mention the temperature. The only thing he did not like was the rats. The third floor was long and deserted, lit only by the stuttering glow of the fluorescents. Unlike the other levels of the mill, it was relatively silent and unoccupied. And I just realized I didn't even have my mic anywhere near me, so I'm sorry, guys. Where was I? At least by the humans. The rats were another matter. The only machine on 3 was the picker. The rest of the floor was storage for the 90-pound bags of fiber which had yet to be stored by the hall's long geared tooth machine. They were stacked like link sausages in long rows, some of them, especially the discontinued Meltons and irregular Slipes for which there were no orders, years old and dirty gray with industrial wastes. They made fine nesting places for the rats, huge, fat-bellied creatures with rabid eyes and bodies that jumped with lice and vermin. Hall had developed a habit of collecting a small arsenal of soft drink cans from the trash barrel during his break. He pegged them at the rats during times when the work was slow, retrieving them later at his leisure. Only this time, Mr. Foreman had caught him, coming up the stairs instead of using the elevator like the sneaky son of a bitch everyone said he was. What are you up to, Hall? The rats, Hall said, realizing how lame that must sound now that all the rats had snuggled safely back into their houses. I peg cans at 'em when I see 'em. Warwick nodded once, briefly. He was a big, beefy man with a crew cut. His shirt sleeves were rolled up and his tie was pulled down. He looked at Hall closely. We don't pay you to chuck cans at rats, mister, not even if you pick them up again. Harry hasn't sent down an order for 20 minutes, Hall answered, thinking. Why couldn't you stay the hell put and drink your coffee? I can't run it through the picker if I don't have it. Warwick nodded, as if the topic no longer interested him. Maybe I'll take a walk up and see Wisconsin, he said. 5 to 1 he's reading a magazine while the crap piles up in his bins. Hall didn't say anything. Warwick suddenly pointed. There's one, get the bastard. Hall fired the Nagy can he had been holding with one whistling, overhand motion. The rat, which had been watching them from atop one of the fabric bags with its bright buckshot eyes, fled with one faint squeak. Warwick threw back his head and laughed as Hall went after the can. I came to see you about something else, Warwick said. Is that so? Next week's 4th of July week. Hall nodded. The mill would be shut down Monday to Sunday, vacation week for men with at least 1 year's tenure, layoff week for men with less than a year. You want to work? Hall shrugged. Doing what? We're going to clean the whole basement level. Nobody's touched it for 12 years. Hell of a mess. We're going to use hoses. The town zoning committee getting on board of it? Warwick looked steadily at Hall. You want it or not? $2 an hour, double time on the 4th. We're working the graveyard shift because it'll be cooler. Hall calculated. He could clear maybe $75 after taxes. Better than the goose egg he had been looking forward to. All right. Report down by the dye house next Monday. Hall watched him as he started back to the stairs. Warwick paused halfway there and turned back to look at Hall. You used to be a college boy, didn't you? Hall nodded. Okay, college boy. I'll keep it in mind. He left. Hall sat down and lit another smoke, holding a soda can in one hand and watching for the rats. He could just imagine how it would be in the basement, the sub-basement, actually, a level below the dye house. Damp, dark, full of spiders and rotten cloth and ooze from the river and rats. Maybe even bats, the aviators of the rodent family. Ugh. Hall threw the can hard, then smiled thinly to himself as the faint sound of Warwick's voice came down through the overhead ducts, reading Harry Wisconski, the Riot Act. Okay, college boy, I'm going to keep it in mind. He stopped smiling abruptly and butted his smoke. A few moments later, Wisconski started to send rough nylon down through the blowers, and Hall went back to work, and after a while the rats came out and sat atop the bags at the back of the long room, watching him with their unblinking black eyes. They looked like a jury. 11 p.m. Monday. There were about 36 men sitting around when Warwick came in wearing a pair of old jeans tucked into high rubber boots. Hall had been listening to Harry Wisconski, who was enormously fat, enormously lazy, and enormously gloomy. It's going to be a mess, Wisconski was saying when Mr. Foreman came in. You wait and see. We're all going to go home blacker midnight in Persia. Okay, Warwick said. We strung 60 light bulbs down there, so it should be bright enough for you to see what you're doing. You guys, he pointed to a bunch of men that had been leaning against the drying spools. I want you to hook up the hoses over there to the main water conduit by the stairwell. You can unroll them down the stairs. We got about 80 yards for each man, and that should be plenty. Don't get cute and spray one of your buddies, or you'll send them to the hospital. They pack a wallop. Somebody'll get hurt, Wisconski prophesied sourly. Wait, and you'll see. You other guys, Warwick said, pointing to the group that Hall and Wisconski were a part of. You're the crap crew tonight. You go in pairs with an electric wagon for each team. There's old office furniture, bags of cloth, hunks of busted machinery, you name it. We're going to pile it up by the air shaft at the west end. Anyone who doesn't know how to run a wagon? No one raised a hand. The electric wagons were battery-driven contraptions like miniature dump trucks. They developed a nauseating stink after continual use that reminded Hall of burning power lines. Okay, Warwick said. We got the basement divided up into sections, and we'll be done by Thursday. Friday, we'll chain hoist the crap out. Questions? There were none. Hall studied the foreman's face closely, and he had a sudden premonition of strange things coming. The idea pleased him. He did not like Warwick very much. Fine, Warwick said. Let's get at it. 2 a.m. Tuesday. Hall was bushed and very tired of listening to Wisconski's steady patter of profane complaints. He wondered if it would do any good to belt Wisconski. He doubted it. It would just give Wisconski something else to bitch about. Hall had known it would be bad, but this was murder. For one thing, he hadn't anticipated the smell. The polluted stink of the river mixed with the odor of decaying fabric, rotting masonry, vegetable matter. In the far corner where they had begun, Hall discovered a colony of huge white toadstools poking their way up through the shattered cement. His hands had come in contact with them as he pulled and yanked at rusty gear-toothed wheel, and they felt curiously warm and bloated like the flesh of a man afflicted with dropsy. The bulbs couldn't banish the 12-year darkness. They could only push it back a little and cast a sickly yellow glow over the whole mess. The place looked like the shattered nave of a desecrated church with its high ceiling and mammoth discarded machinery that they would never be able to move in wet walls overgrown with patches of yellow moss. And the atonal choir that was the water from the hoses running in the half-clogged sewer network that eventually emptied into the river below the falls. And the rats, huge ones, that made those on the third looked like dwarfs. God knew what they were eating down here. They were continually overturning boards and bags to reveal huge nests of shredded newspaper, watching with atavistic loathing at the pups as the pups fled into the cracks and crannies, their eyes huge and blind with the continuous darkness. "Let's stop for a smoke," Wisconski said. He sounded out of breath, but Hall had no idea why. He had been gold-bricking all night. Still, it was about that time, and they were currently out of sight of everyone else. All right. He leaned against the edge of the electric wagon and lit up. "I never should have let Warwick talk me into this," Wisconski said dolefully. "This ain't work for a man. But he was mad the other night when he caught me in the crapper up on 4 with my pants up. Christ, was he mad!" Hall said nothing. He was thinking about Warwick, and about the rats. Strange how the two things seemed tied together. The rats seemed to have forgotten all about men and their long stay under the mill. They were impudent and hardly afraid at all. One of them had sat up on its hind legs like a squirrel until Hall had gotten in kicking distance, and then it had launched itself at his boot, biting at the leather. Hundreds, maybe thousands. He wondered how many varieties of disease they were carrying around in the black armful. And Warwick? Something about him. "I need the money," Wisconski said. "But Christ Jesus, Buddy, this ain't no work for a man. Those rats!" He looked around fearfully. "It almost seems like they think. You ever wonder how it'd be if we was little and they were big?" "Oh, shut up," Hall said. Wisconski looked at him, wounded. "Say, I'm sorry, Buddy. It's just that—" He trailed off. "Jesus, this place stinks," he cried. "This ain't no kind of work for a man." A spider crawled off the edge of the wagon and scrambled up his arm. He brushed it off with a choked sound of disgust. "Come on," Hall said, snuffing his cigarette. "The faster the quicker." "I suppose," Wisconski said miserably. "I suppose." 4 a.m. Tuesday. Lunchtime. Hall and Wisconski sat with 3 or 4 other men eating their sandwiches with black hands that not even the industrial detergent could clean. Hall ate looking into the foreman's little glass office. Warwick was drinking coffee and eating cold hamburgers with great relish. Ray Upson had to go home, Charlie Brockus said. "He puke?" someone asked. "I almost did." "Nah. Ray'd eat a cow flop for he'd puke. Rat bit him." Hall looked up thoughtfully from his examination of Warwick. "Is that so?" he asked. "Yeah," Brockus shook his head. "I was teaming with him. Goddamnedest thing I ever saw. Jumped out of a hole in one of those old cloth bags. Must have been as big as a cat. Grabbed onto his hand and started chewing." "Jesus," one of the men said, looking green. "Yeah," Brockus said. "Ray screamed just like a woman, and I ain't blaming him. He bled like a pig. Would that thing let go? No, sir. I had to belt it 3 or 4 times with a board before it would. Ray was just about crazy. He stomped it until it wasn't nothing but a mess of fur. Damnedest thing I ever saw." Warwick put a bandage on him and sent him home. Told him to go to the doctor tomorrow. "That was big of the bastard," somebody said. As if he had heard, Warwick got to his feet in his office, stretched, and then came to the door. "Time we get back with it." The men got to their feet slowly, eating up all the time they possibly could, stowing their dinner buckets, getting cold drinks, buying candy bars. Then they started down, heels clanking dispiritedly on the steel grill work of the stair risers. Warwick passed Hall, clapping him on the shoulders. "How's it going, college boy?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Come on," Hall said patiently to Wisconski, who was tying his shoelace. They went downstairs. 7 a.m. Tuesday. Hall and Wisconski walked out together. It seemed to Hall that he had somehow inherited the fat pull. Wisconski was almost comically dirty, his fat moon face smeared like that of a small boy who's just been thrashed by the town bully. There was none of the usual rough banter from the other men, the pulling of shirt tails, the cracks about who was keeping Tony's wife warm between the hours of 1 and 4, nothing but silence, and an occasional hawking sound as someone spat on the dirty floor. "You want a lift?" Wisconsin asked him hesitantly. "Thanks." They didn't talk as they rode up Mill Street and crossed the bridge. They exchanged only a brief word when Wisconsin dropped him off in front of his apartment. Hall went directly to the shower, still thinking about Warwick, trying to place whatever it was about the Mr. Foreman that drew him, made him feel that somehow they had become tied together. He slept as soon as his head hit the pillow, but his sleep was broken and restless. He dreamed of rats. 1 a.m. Wednesday. It was better running the hoses. They couldn't go in until the crack crews had finished a section, and quite often they were done hosing before the next section was clear, which meant time for a cigarette. Hall worked the nozzle of one of the long hoses, and Wisconsin pattered back and forth, unsnagging lengths of the hose, turning the water on and off, moving the obstructions. Warwick was short-tempered because the work was proceeding slowly. They would never be done by Thursday, the way things were going. Now they were working on a helter-skelter jumble of 19th-century office equipment that had been piled in one corner, smashed roll-top desks, moldy ledgers, reams of invoices, chairs with broken seats, and it was rat heaven. Scores of them squeaked and ran through the dark and crazy passages that honeycombed the heap, and after 2 men were bitten, the others refused to work until Warwick sent someone upstairs to get heavy rubberized gloves, the kind that's usually reserved for the dye-house crew, which had to work with acids. Hall and Wisconsin were waiting to go in with the hoses when a sandy-haired bullneck named Carmichael began howling curses and backing away, slapping at his chest with his gloved hands. A huge rat with gray-streaked fur and ugly, glaring eyes had bitten into his shirt and hung there, squeaking and kicking at Carmichael's belly with its huge back paws. Carmichael finally knocked it away with his fist, but there was a huge hole in his shirt and a thin line of blood trickled from above one nipple. The anger faded from his face. He turned away and retched. Hall turned the hose on the rat, which was old and moving slowly. A snatch of Carmichael's shirt still caught in its jaws. The roaring pressure drove it backwards against the wall, where it smashed limply. Warwick came over, an odd, strained smile on his lips. He clapped Hall on the shoulder. "Damn sight better than throwing cans at the little bastards. Huh, college boy?" "Some little bastards," Wisconsin said. "It's a foot long." "Turn that hose over there." Warwick pointed at the jumble of furniture. "You guys get out of the way." "With pleasure," someone muttered. Carmichael charged up to Warwick, his face sick and twisted. "I'm going to have compensation for this. I'm going to—" "Sure," Warwick said, smiling. "You got bit on the titty. Get out of the way before you get pasted down by this water." Paul pointed to the nozzle and let it go. It hit with a white explosion of spray, knocking over a desk and smashing 2 chairs to splinters. Rats ran everywhere, bigger than any Hall had ever seen. He could hear men crying out in disgust and horror as they fled, things with huge eyes and sleek, plump bodies. He caught a glimpse of one that looked as big as a healthy 6-week puppy. He kept on until he could see no more, then shut the nozzle down. "Okay," Warwick called. "Let's pick it up." "I didn't hire out as no exterminator," Cy Ipston called mutinously. Hall had tipped a few with him the weeks before. He was a young guy wearing a smut-stained baseball cap and a T-shirt. "That you, Ipston?" Warwick asked genially. Ipston looked uncertain but stepped forward. "Yeah. I don't want no more of these rats. I hired to clean up, not to maybe get rabies or typhoid or something. Maybe you best count me out." There was a murmur of agreement from the others. Wisconsin stole a look at Hall, but Hall was examining the nozzle of the hose he was holding. It had a bore like a .45 and could probably knock a man 20 feet. You saying you want to punch your clock, Si? Thinking about it, Ipston said. Warwick nodded. Okay, you and anybody else that wants. But this ain't no unionized shop. It never has been. Punch out now, and you'll never punch back in. I'll see to it. Aren't you some hot ticket? Hall muttered. Warwick swung around. Did you say something, college boy? Hall regarded him blandly. Just cleared my throat, Mr. Foreman. Warwick smiled. Something tastes bad to you? Hall said nothing. All right, let's pick it up, Warwick bawled. They went back to work. 2 a.m. Thursday. Hall and Wisconsin were working with the trucks again, picking up junk. The pile by the west air shaft had grown to amazing proportions, but they were still not half done. Happy 4th, Wisconsin said when they stopped for a smoke. They were working near the north hall, far from the stairs. The light was extremely dim, and some trick of acoustics made the other men seem miles away. Thanks. Hall dragged on his smoke. Haven't seen many rats tonight. Nobody has, Wisconsin said. Maybe they got wise. They were standing at the end of a cozy, zigzagging alley formed by piles of old ledgers and invoices, moldy bags of cloth, and 2 huge flat looms of ancient vintage. Ugh, Wisconsin said, spitting. That Warwick. Where do you suppose all the rats got to? Hall asked, almost to himself. Not into the walls. He looked at the wet and crumbling masonry that surrounded the huge foundation stones. They'd drowned. The river saturated everything. Something black and flapping suddenly dive-bombed them. Wisconsin screamed and put his hand over his head. A bat, Hall said, watching after it as Wisconsin straightened up. A bat? A bat? Wisconsin raved. What's a bat doing in the cellar? They're supposed to be in the trees and under eaves, and it was a big one, Hall said softly. And what's a bat but a rat with wings? Jesus, Wisconsin moaned. How did it get in? Maybe the same way the rats got out. What's going on back there? Warwick shouted from somewhere behind them. Where are you? Don't sweat it, Hall said softly. His eyes gleamed in the dark. Was that you, college boy? Warwick called. He sounded closer. It's okay, Hall yelled. I barked my shin. Warwick's short, barking laugh. You want a Purple Heart? Wisconsin looked at Hall. Why'd you say that? Look. Hall knelt and lit a match. There was a square in the middle of the wet and crumbling cement. Tap it. Wisconsin did. It's wood. Hall nodded. It's the top of a support. I've seen some other ones around here. There's another level under this part of the basement. God, Wisconsin said, with utter revulsion. 3:30 a.m. Thursday. They were in the northeast corner, Ipston and Broku behind them with one of the high-pressure hoses when Hall stopped and pointed at the floor. There. I thought we'd come across it. There was a wooden trapdoor with a crusted iron ring bolt set near the center. He walked back to Ipston and said, Shut it off for a minute. When the hose was choked to a trickle, he raised his voice to a shout. Hey! Hey, Warwick! Better come here a minute. Warwick came splashing over, looking at Hall with the same hard smile in his eyes. Your shoelace come untied, college boy. Look, Hall said. He kicked the trapdoor with his foot. Sub-cellar. Sub what? Warwick asked. This isn't break time. That's where your rats are, Hall said. They're breeding down there. Wisconsin and I even saw a bat earlier. Some of the other men had gathered round and were looking at the trap door. I don't care, Warwick said. The job was the basement, not. You'll need about 20 exterminators. Trained ones, Hall was saying. Gonna cost the management a pretty penny, too. Too bad. Someone laughed. Fat chance. Warwick looked at Hall as if he were a bug under glass. You're really a case, you are, he said, sounding fascinated. Do you think I give a good goddamn how many rats there are under there? I was at the library this afternoon and yesterday, Hall said. Good thing you kept reminding me I was a college boy. I read the town zoning ordinances. Warwick, they were set up in 1911, before this mill got big enough to co-opt the zoning board. Know what I found? Warwick's eyes grew cold. Take a walk, college boy. You're fired. I found out, Hall plowed on as if he hadn't heard. I found out that there is a zoning law in Gates Falls about vermin. You spell that vermin in case you wondered. It means disease-carrying animals such as bats, skunks, unlicensed dogs, and rats, especially rats. Rats are mentioned 14 times in 2 paragraphs, Mr. Foreman. So you just keep in mind that the minute I punch out, I'm going straight to the town commissioner and tell him what the situation down here is. He paused, relishing Warwick's hate-congested face. I think that between me, him, and the town committee, we can get an injunction slapped on this place. You're going to be shut down a lot longer than just Saturday, Mr. Foreman, and I got a good idea what your boss is going to say when he turns up. Hope your unemployment insurance is paid up, Warwick. Warwick's hands formed into claws. You damned snot-nose. I oughta... He looked down at the trap door. And suddenly, his smile reappeared. Consider yourself rehired, college boy. I thought you might see the light. Warwick nodded, the same strange grin on his face. You're just so smart. I think maybe you ought to go down there, Hall. So we got somebody with a college education to give us an informed opinion. You and Wisconsin. Not me, Wisconsin exclaimed. Not me. Warwick looked at him. You what? Wisconsin shut up. Good, Hall said cheerfully. We'll need 3 flashlights. I think I saw a whole rack of 6 battery jobs in the main office, didn't I? You want to take somebody else? Warwick asked expansively. Sure, pick your man. You, Hall said gently. The strange expression had come into his face again. After all, the management should be represented, don't you think? Just so Wisconsin and I don't see too many rats down there. Someone, sounded like Ipiston, laughed loudly. Warwick looked at the men carefully. They studied the tips of their shoes. Finally, he pointed at Bracu. Bracu, go up to the office and get 3 flashlights. Tell the watchman I said to let you in. Why'd you get me into this? Wisconsin moaned to Hall. You know I hate those. It wasn't me, Hall said, and looked at Warwick. Warwick looked back at him, and neither would drop their eyes. 4 a.m. Thursday. Bracu returned with the flashlights. He gave 1 to Hall, 1 to Wisconsin, and 1 to Warwick. Ipiston, give the hose to Wisconsin. Ipiston did so. The nozzle trembled delicately between the Pole's hands. All right, Warwick said to Wisconsin. You're in the middle. If there are rats, you let them have it. Sure, Hall thought. And if there are rats, Warwick won't see them, and neither will Wisconsin, after he finds an extra 10 in his pay envelope. Warwick pointed at 2 of the men. Lift it. One of them bent over the ring bolt and pulled. For a moment, Hall didn't think it was going to give, and then it yanked free with an odd, clenching snap. The other man put his fingers on the underside to help pull, then withdrew with a cry. His hands were crawling with huge and sightless beetles. With a convulsive grunt, the man on the ring bolt pulled the trap back and let it drop. The underside was black with an old fungus that Hall had never seen before. The beetles dropped off into the darkness below or ran across the floor to be crushed. Look, Hall said. There was a rusty lock bolted on the underside, now broken. But it shouldn't be underneath, Warwick said. It should be on top. Why? Lots of reasons, Hall said. Maybe so nothing on this side could open it, at least when the lock was new. Maybe so nothing on that side could get up. But who locked it? Wisconsin asked. Ah, Hall said mockingly, looking at Warwick. A mystery. Listen, Roku whispered. Oh, God, Wisconsin sobbed. I ain't going down there. It was a soft sound, almost expectant, the whisk and patter of thousands of paws and squeaking of rats. Could be frogs, Warwick said. Hall laughed aloud. Warwick shone his light down there. A sagging flight of wooden stairs led down to black stones on the floor beneath. There was not a rat in sight. Those stairs won't hold us, Warwick said with finality. Roku took 2 steps forward and jumped up and down on the first step. It creaked, but showed no sign of giving way. I didn't ask you to do that, Warwick said. You weren't there when that rat bit Ray, Roku said softly. Let go, Hall said. Warwick took a last sardonic look around at the circle of men, then walked to the edge with Hall. Wisconsin stepped reluctantly between them. They went down one at a time, Hall, then Wisconsin, then Warwick. Their flashlight beams played over the floor, which was twisted and heaved into 100 crazy hills and valleys. The hose thumped along behind Wisconsin like a clumsy serpent. When they got to the bottom, Warwick flashed his light around. It picked out a few rotting boxes, some barrels, little else. The seep from the river stood in puddles that came to ankle depth around on their boots. I don't hear them any more, Wisconsin whispered. They walked slowly away from the trapdoor, their feet shuffling through the slime. Hall paused and shone his light on a huge wooden box with white letters on it. Elias Varney, he read, 1841. Was the mill here then? No, Warwick said. It wasn't built until 1897. What difference? Hall didn't answer. They walked forward again. The subcellar was longer than it should have been, it seemed. The stench was stronger. A smell of decay and rot and things buried, and still the only sound was the faint cave-like drip of water. What's that? Hall asked, pointing his beam at a jet of concrete that protruded perhaps 2 feet into the cellar. Beyond it the darkness continued, and it seemed to Hall that he could now hear sounds up there, curiously stealthy. Warwick peered at it. It's... No, that can't be right. Outer wall of the mill, isn't it? And up ahead. I'm going back, Warwick said, suddenly turning around. Hall grabbed his neck roughly. You're not going anywhere, Mr. Foreman. Warwick looked up at him, his grin cutting the darkness. You're crazy, college boy. Isn't that right? Crazy as a loon. You shouldn't push people, friend. Keep going. Wisconsin moaned. Hall, give me that. Hall grabbed the hose. He let go of Warwick's neck and pointed the hose at his head. Wisconsin turned abruptly and crashed back toward the trap door. Hall did not even turn. After you, Mr. Foreman. Warwick stepped forward, walking under the place where the mill ended above them. Hall flashed his light about and felt a cold satisfaction, premonition fulfilled. The rats had closed in around them, silent as death, crowded in, rank on rank, thousands of eyes looking greedily back at him, in ranks to the wall, some fully as high as the man's chin. Warwick saw them a moment later, and came to a full stop. They're all around us, college boy. His voice was still calm, still in control, but it held a jagged edge. Yes, Hall said. Keep going. They walked forward, the hose dragging behind. Hall looked back once and saw the rats had closed the aisle behind them and were gnawing at the heavy canvas hosing. One looked up and almost seemed to grin at him before lowering his head. He could see the bats now, too. They were roosting from the rough-hewn overheads, huge, the size of crows or rooks. Look, Warwick said, centering his beam about 5 feet ahead. A skull, green with mold, laughed up at them. Further on Hall could see an ulna, one pelvic wing, part of a rib cage. Keep going, Hall said. He felt something bursting up inside of him, something lunatic and dark with colors. You are going to break before I do, Mr. Foreman, so help me God. They walked past the bones. The rats were not crowding them. Their distances appeared constant. Up ahead, Hall saw one cross their path of travel. Shadows hid it, but he caught sight of a pink, twitching tail as thick as a telephone cord. Up ahead, the flooring rose sharply, then dipped. Hall could hear a stealthy rustling sound, a big sound, something that perhaps no living man had ever seen. It occurred to Hall that he had perhaps been looking for something like this through all his days of crazy wandering. The rats were moving in, creeping on their bellies, forcing them forward. Look, Warwick said coldly. Hall saw. Something had happened to the rats back here, some hideous mutation that never could have survived under the eye of the sun. Nature would have forbidden it. But down here, nature had taken on another ghastly face. The rats were gigantic, some as high as 3 feet, but their rear legs were gone, and they were blind as moles. Like their flying cousins, they dragged themselves forward with hideous eagerness. Warwick turned and faced Hall, the smile hanging on by brute willpower. Hall really had to admire that. We can't go on, Hall. You must see that. The rats have business with you, I think, Hall said. Warwick's control slipped. Please, he said. Please. Hall smiled. Keep going. Warwick was looking over his shoulder. They're gnawing into the hose. When they get through it, we'll never get back. I know. Keep going. You're insane. A rat ran across Warwick's shoe, and he screamed. Hall smiled and gestured with his light. They were all around, the closest of them less than a foot away now. Warwick began to walk again. The rats drew back. They topped the miniature rise and looked down. Warwick reached it first, and Hall saw his face go white as paper. Spit ran down his chin. Oh my God, dear Jesus. And he turned to run. Hall opened the nozzle of the hose, and the high-pressure rush of water struck Warwick squarely on the chest, knocking him back out of sight. There was a long scream that rose over the sound of the water. Thrashing sounds. Hall! Grunts. A huge, tenebrous squeaking that seemed to fill the earth. Hall, for God's sake! A sudden, wet, ripping noise. Another scream, weaker. Something huge shifted and turned. Quite distinctly, Hall heard the wet snap that a fractured bone makes. A legless rat, guided by some bastard form of sonar, lunged against him, biting. Its body was flabby, warm. Almost absently Hall turned the hose on it, knocking it away. The hose did not have quite so much pressure now. He walked to the brow of the wet hill and looked down. The rat filled the whole gully at the far end of the noxious tube. It was huge and pulsating gray, eyeless, totally without legs. When Hall's light struck it, it made a hideous, mewling noise. Their queen, then, the Magna Mater, a huge and nameless things with those progeny might some day develop wings. It seemed to dwarf what remained of Warwick, but that was probably just illusion. It was the shock of seeing a rat as big as a Holstein calf. Goodbye, Warwick, Hall said. The rat crouched over Mr. Foreman jealously, ripping at one limb arm. Hall turned away and began to make his way back rapidly, halting the rats with his hose, which was growing less and less potent. Some of them got through and attacked his legs above the top of his boots with biting lunges. One hung stubbornly on his thigh, ripping at the cloth of his corduroy pants. Hall made a fist and smashed it aside. He was nearly 3/4 of the way back when the huge whirring filled the darkness. He looked up. and the gigantic flying form smashed into his face. The mutated bats had not lost their tails yet. He whipped around Hall's neck in a loathsome coil and squeezed as the teeth sought the soft spot under his neck. It wriggled and flapped in its membranous wings, clutching the tatters of his shirt for purchase. Hall brought the nozzle of the hose up blindly and struck at its yielding body again and again. It fell away, and he trampled it beneath his feet, dimly aware that he was screaming. The rats ran in a flood over his feet, up his legs. He broke into a staggering run, shaking some off. The others bit at his belly and his chest. One ran up his shoulder and pressed its questing muzzle into the cup of his ear. He ran into the second bat. It roosted on his head for a moment, squealing, and then ripped away a flap of Hall's scalp. He felt his body growing numb, his ears filled with screech and yammer of many rats. He gave one last heave, stumbled over furry bodies, fell to his knees, and he began to laugh, a high, screaming sound. 5 a.m. Thursday. Somebody better go down there, Roku said tentatively. Not me, Wisconski whispered. Not me. No, not you, Jelly Belly, Episton said with contempt. Well, let's go, Brogan said, bringing up another hose. Me, Ibston, and Dangerfield. Nadeau, Stevenson, go up to the office and get a few more lights. Epstein looked down into the darkness thoughtfully. Maybe they stopped for a smoke, he said. Few rats. What the hell? Stevenson came back with the lights. A few moments later, they started down. And that was the first story. The second story is only 9 pages long, and I'll probably read it since I missed last week. And then when that is done, I will shut this stream down and I will start a hangout. Maybe. I may take a break and then start a hangout. We will see. But I've been reading for a minute and I need some water. All right. Third story is called Night Surf. After the guy was dead and the smell of his burning flesh was off the air, we all went back down to the beach. Corey had his radio, one of those suitcase-sized transistor jobs that take about 40 batteries and also make and play tapes. You couldn't say the sound reproduction was great, but it sure was loud. Corey had been well-to-do before A6, but stuff like that didn't matter anymore. Even his big radio/tape player was hardly more than a nice-looking hunk of junk. There were only 2 radio stations left on air that we could get. One was WKDM in Portsmouth, some backwoods DJ who had gone nutty religious. He'd play a Perry Como record, say a prayer, bawl, play a Johnny Ray record, read from Psalms, complete with each Selah, just like James Dean in East of Eden, then bawl some more. Happy time stuff like that. One day he sang Bringin' in the Sheaves in a cracked, moldy voice that sent needles in me into hysteria. The Massachusetts station was better, but we could only get it at night. It was a bunch of kids. I guess they took over the transmitting facilities of WRKO or WBZ after everybody left or died. They only gave gag call letters like WDOPE or KUNT or WA6 or stuff like that. Really funny. You could die laughing. That was the one we were listening to on the way back to the beach. I was holding hands with Susie, Kelly and Joan were ahead of us, and Needles was already over the brow of the point out of sight. Corey was bringing up the weir, swinging his radio. The Stones were singing Angie. Do you love me? Susie was asking. That's all I want to know. Do you love me? Susie needed constant reassurance. I was her teddy bear. No, I said. She was getting fat, and if she lived long enough, which wasn't likely, she would get really flabby. She was already mouthy. You're rotten, she said, and put a hand to her face. Her lacquered fingernails twinkled dimly with the half moon that had risen about an hour ago. Are you going to cry again? Shut up. She sounded like she was going to cry again, all right. We came up over the ridge and I paused. I always have to pause. Before A6, this had been a public beach. Tourists, picnickers, runny-nosed kids, and fat baggy grandmothers with sunburned elbows, candy wrappers and popsicle sticks in the sand, all the beautiful people necking on their beach blankets, intermingling the stench of exhaust from parking lot seaweed and copper-tone oil. But now all the dirt and all the crap was gone. The ocean had eaten it, all of it, as casually as you might eat a handful of Cracker Jacks. There were no people to come back and dirty it again. Just us, and we weren't enough to make much of a mess. We loved the beach, too, I guess. Hadn't we just offered it a kind of sacrifice? Even Susie, little bitch Susie with her fat ass and her cranberry bell-bottoms. The sand was white and duned, marked only by the high tide line, twisted skein of seaweed, kelp, hunks of driftwood. The moonlight stitched inky crescent-shaped shadows and folds across everything. The deserted lifeguard tower stood white and skeletal some 50 yards from the bathhouse, pointing toward the sky like a finger bone, and the surf, the night surf, throwing up great bursts of foam, breaking against the headlands for as far as we could see in endless attacks. Maybe that water had been halfway to England the night before. Angie by the stones, the cracked voice on Corey's radio said. I'm Soraya Doug, that one. A blast from the past, that's a golden gas, straight from the graveyard, a platter that matters. I'm Bobby. This was supposed to be Fred's night. But Fred got the flu. He's all swelled up. Susie giggled then, with the first tears still on her eyelashes. I started toward the beach a little faster to keep her quiet. Wait up, Corey called. Bernie! Hey, Bernie, wait up! The guy on the radio was reading some dirty limericks, and a girl in the background asked him where did he put the beer. He said something back, but by the time we were on the beach, I looked back to see how Corey was doing. He was coming down on his backside, as usual, and he looked so ludicrous I felt a little sorry for him. Run with me, I said to Susie. Why? I slapped her on the can and she squealed. Just because it feels good to run. We ran. She fell behind, panting like a horse and calling for me to slow down, but I put her out of my head. The wind rushed past my ears and blew the hair off my forehead. I could smell the salt in the air, sharp and tart. The surf pounded. The waves were like foamed black glass. I kicked off my rubber sandals and pounded across the sand barefoot, not minding the sharp digs of an occasional shell. My blood roared. And then there was the lean-to with needles already inside and Kelly and Joan standing beside it, holding hands and looking at the water. I did a forward roll, feeling sand go down the back of my shirt, and fetched up against Kelly's legs. He fell on top of me and rubbed my face in the sand while Joan laughed. We got up and grinned at each other. Susie had given up running and was plodding toward us. Corey had almost caught up to her. Some fire, Kelly said. Do you think he came all the way from New York, like he said? Joan asked. I don't know. I couldn't see that it mattered anyway. He had been behind the wheel of a big Lincoln when we found him, semi-conscious and raving. His head was bloated to the size of a football, and his neck looked like a sausage. He had Captain Trips, and not far to go, either. So we took him up to the point that overlooks the beach and burned him. He said his name was Alvin Sackheim. He kept calling for his grandmother. He thought Susie was his grandmother. This struck her funny, God knows why. The strangest things strike Susie funny. It was Corey's idea to burn him up, but it started off as a joke. He had read all those books about witchcraft and black magic at college, and kept leering at us in the dark beside Alvin Sackheim's Lincoln and telling us that if we made a sacrifice to the dark gods, maybe the spirits would keep protecting us against A6. Of course, none of us really believed that bullshit, but talk got more and more serious. It was a new thing to do, and finally we went ahead and did it. We tied him to the observation gadget up there. You put a dime in it, and on a clear day you can see all the way to Portland headlights. We tied him with our belts, and we went rooting around for dry brush and hunks of driftwood like kids playing a new kind of hide and seek. All the time we were doing it, Alvin Sackheim just sort of leaned there and mumbled to his grandmother. Susie's eyes got very bright and she was breathing fast. It was really turning her on. When we were down in the ravine on the other side of the outcrop, she leaned against me and kissed me. She was wearing too much lipstick, and it was like kissing a greasy plate. I pushed her away, and that was when she started pouting. We went back up, all of us, and piled dead branches and twigs up to Alvin Sackheim's waist. Needles lit the pyre with the Zippo, and it went up fast. At the end, just before his hair caught on fire, the man began to scream. There was a smell just like sweet Chinese pork. Got a cigarette, Bernie? Needles asked. There's about 50 cartons right behind you. He grinned and slapped a mosquito that was probing his arm. Don't want to move. I gave him a smoke and sat down. Susie and I met Needles in Portland. He was sitting on the curb in front of the State Theater playing lead belly tunes on a big old Gibson guitar he had looted someplace. The sound had echoed up and down Congress Street as if he were playing in a concert hall. Susie stopped in front of us, still out of breath. You're rotten, Bernie. Come on, Sue. Turn the record over. That side stinks. Bastard. Stupid. Unfeeling. Son of a bitch. Creep. Go away, I said. Or I'll black your eyes, Susie. See if I don't. She started to cry again. She was really good at it. Corey came up and tried to put an arm around her. She elbowed him in the crotch, and he spit in her face. I'll kill you. She came at him, screaming and weeping, making propellers with her hands. Corey backed off, almost fell, then turned trail and ran. Susie followed, hurling hysterical obscenities. Needles put back his head and laughed. The sound of Corey's radio came back to us faintly over the surf. Kelly and Joan had wandered off. I could see them down by the edge of the water, walking with their arms around each other's waists. They looked like an ad in a travel agent's window. Fly to beautiful St. Lorca. It was all right. They had a good thing. Bernie? What? I sat and smoked and thought about Needles, flipping back the top of his Zippo, spinning the wheel, making fire with flint and steel like a caveman. I've got it, Needles said. Yeah? I looked at him. Are you sure? Sure I am. My head aches. My stomach aches. Hurts to piss. Maybe it's just Hong Kong flu. Susie had Hong Kong flu. She wanted a Bible. I laughed. That had been why we were still at the university, about a week before they closed it down for good, a month before they started carrying bodies away in dump trucks and burying them in mass graves with payloaders. Look. He lit a match and held it under the angle of his jaw. I could see the first triangular smudges, the first swelling. It was A6 all right. Okay, I said. I don't feel so bad, he said. In my mind, I mean. You, though, you think about it a lot, I can tell. No, I don't. A lie. Sure you do. Like that guy tonight. You're thinking about that, too. We probably did him a favor, when you get right down to it. I don't think he even knew it was happening. He knew. He shrugged and turned on his side. It doesn't matter. We smoked, and I watched the surf come in and go out. Needles had captained trips. That made everything real all over again. It was late August already, and in a couple of weeks the first chill of fall would be creeping in. Time to move inside someplace. Winter. Dead by Christmas, maybe. All of us. In somebody's front room, with Corey's expensive radio tape player on top of a bookcase full of Reader's Digest condensed books, and the weak winter sun lying on the rug in the meaningless window pane patterns. The vision was clear enough to make me shudder. Nobody should think about winter in August. It's like a goose walking over your grave. Needles laughed. See? You do think about it. What could I say? I stood up. Going to look for Susie. Maybe we're the last people on Earth, Bernie. Did you ever think of that? In the faint moonlight, he already looked half dead, with circles under his eyes and pallid, unmoving fingers like pencils. I walked down to the water and looked out across it. There was nothing to see but the restless moving humps of the waves, topped by delicate curls of foam. The thunder of the breakers was tremendous down here, bigger than the world, like standing inside a thunderstorm. I closed my eyes and rocked on my bare feet. The sand was cold and damp and packed. And if we were the last people on Earth, so what? This would go on as long as there was a moon to pool the water. Susie and Corey were up the beach. Susie was riding him as if he were a bucking bronc, pounding his head into the running boil of the water. Corey was flailing and splashing. They were both soaked. I walked down and pushed her off with my foot. Corey splashed away on all fours, spluttering and woofing. I hate you! Susie screamed at me. Her mouth was a dark, grinning crescent. It looked like the entrance to a fun house. When I was a kid, my mother used to take us kids to the Harrison State Park, and there was a fun house with a big clown face on the front, and you walked in through the mouth. Come on, Susie. Up, Fido. I held out my hand. She took it doubtfully and stood up. There was damp sand clotted on her blouse and skin. You didn't have to push me, Bernie. You don't never. Come on. She wasn't like a junkie. You never had to put in a dime, and she never came unplugged. Or she wasn't like a jukebox. You never had to put in a dime, and she never came unplugged. We walked up the beach toward the main concession. The man who ran the place had had a small overhead apartment. There was a bed. She didn't really deserve a bed, but Needles was right about that. It didn't matter. No one was really scoring the game anymore. The stairs went up the side of the building, but I paused for just a minute to look in the broken window at the dusty wares inside that no one had cared enough about to loot. Stacks of sweatshirts, Anson Beach, and a picture of the sky and waves printed on the front, glittering bracelets that would green the wrist on the second day. Bright junk earrings, beach balls, dirty greeting cards, badly painted ceramic Madonnas, plastic vomit, so realistic, try it on your wife. 4th of July sparklers for a 4th that never was. Beach towels with a voluptuous girl in a bikini standing amid the names of 100 famous resort areas. Pennants. Souvenirs of Anson Beach and Park. Balloons. Bathing suits. There was a snack bar up front with a big sign saying, "Try our clam cake special." I used to come to Anson Beach a lot when I was still in high school. That was 7 years before A6, and I was going with a girl named Maureen. She was a big girl. She had a pink checked bathing suit. I used to tell her it looked like a tablecloth. We had walked along the boardwalk in front of this place, barefoot, the boards hot and sandy beneath our heels. We had never tried the clam cake special. What are you looking at? Nothing. Come on. I had sweaty, ugly dreams about Alvin Sackheim. He was propped behind the wheel of a shiny yellow Lincoln talking about his grandmother. He was nothing but a bloated, blackened head and a charred skeleton. He smelt burnt. He talked on, and after a while I couldn't make out a single word. I woke up breathing hard. Susie was sprawled across my thighs, pale and bloated. My watch said 3:50, but it had stopped. It was still dark out. The surf pounded and smashed. High tide. Make it 4:15. Light soon. I got out of bed and went to the doorway. The sea breeze felt fine against my hot body. In spite of it all, I didn't want to die. I went over in the corner and grabbed a beer. There were 3 or 4 cases of Bud stacked against the wall. It was warm because there was no electricity. I don't mind warm beer like some people do, though. It just foams a little more. Beer is beer. I went back out on the landing and sat down and pulled the ring tab and drank up. So here we were, with the whole human race wiped out, not by atomic weapons, or biowarfare, or pollution, or anything grand like that, just the flu. I'd like to put down a huge plaque somewhere in the Bonneville Salt Flats, maybe bronze square, 3 miles on a side, and a big raised letters it would say, for the benefit of any landing aliens, just the flu. I tossed the beer can over the side. It landed with a hollow clank on the cement walk that went around the building. The lean-to was a dark triangle on the sand. I wondered if Needles was awake. I wondered if I would be. Bernie? She was standing in the doorway wearing one of my shirts. I hate that. She sweats like a pig. You don't like me much anymore, do you, Bernie? Didn't say anything. There were times when I could still feel sorry for everything. She didn't deserve me any more than I deserved her. Can I sit down with you? I doubt if it would be wide enough for both of us. She made a choked, hiccuping noise and started to go back inside. Needles has got A6, I said. She stopped and looked at me. Her face was very still. Don't joke, Bernie. I lit a cigarette. He can't. Yes, he had A2. Hong Kong flu, just like you and me and Corey and Kelly and Joan. But that would mean he isn't immune. Yes, then we could get it. Maybe he lied when he said he had A2, so we'd take him along with us that time, I said. Relief spilled across her face. Sure, that's it. I would have lied if it had been me. Nobody likes to be alone, do they? She hesitated, coming back to bed. Not just now. She went inside. I didn't have to tell her that A2 was no guarantee against A6. She knew that. She had just blocked it out. I sat and watched the surf. It was really up. Years ago, Anson had been the only halfway decent surfing spot in the state. The point was a dark, jutting hump against the sky. I thought I could see the upright that was the observation post, but it probably was just imagination. Sometimes Kelly took Joan up to the point. I didn't think they were up there tonight. I put my face in my hands and clutched it, feeling the skin, its grain and texture. It was all narrowing so swiftly. And it was all so mean. There was no dignity in it. The surf coming in, coming in, coming in, limitless, clean and deep. We'd come here in the summer, Maureen and I, the summer after high school, the summer before college and reality and A6 coming out of Southeast Asia and covering the world like a Paul July. We had eaten pizza and listened to her radio. I had put oil on her back, she had put oil on mine. The air had been hot, the sand bright, and the sun like a burning glass. And that is where the author ended that one. Sorry. I needed a drink of water, though. Okay, so as always, I don't want to edit. I don't want to cut anything. I don't want to mess with any of that. So I may or may not be back in a few minutes with the stream. But I am ending this session of book club. So later days, and thank you for coming.